Okay, so for all of you who are logging in, we're just waiting a few seconds to let people get into the webinar and then we'll start. My clocks are all starting to go off and there's no way for me to stop them. Oh, well. Okay. Well, it looks like it's sort of settled down. I'm not seeing any major increases right now, so I am going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Gardening Seminar Webinar Series, sponsored and presented by the Central Oregon Master Gardeners, Oregon State University, and our sponsors. And thank you for joining us on this cool but beautiful April day. And I do want to let everybody know I've got a clock that's going to go off. It's over 100 years old. I'm just going to pause for a minute and let it do its thing. Thank you. Sorry about that. My name is Vicki Miner, and I will be your host this morning. And we've got a couple of other Master Gardeners assisting behind the scenes today. Janet Dart and Jenny Whalen. Our presenter is Holly Schaefer, and she'll be talking about high desert hardy perennials and shrubs. But I have a few housekeeping items for our seminar before I get started and before I formally introduce Holly. As you can see on this slide, all videos and microphones are off except for the presenters. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A field. There's a button at the bottom of your screen, and if you click on that, you'll get to a Q&A window, and just put your questions in there, and we will reserve time at the end to answer anything that was not addressed during the slide presentation. If you like a question that someone asked, you can upvote it, and that's using that little thumbs up sign that will allow you to add that you like that question, and that will move the question up in the queue. The presentation is being recorded and will be available online for a short period of time following the session. And a few days after we finish today, you'll get an email with the recording and with any links that we might have posted to the Q&A during the session. So here's our presenter today, Holly Schaefer. And with so many plants to choose from at local garden centers, it can be confusing as to what does well here in Central Oregon. Holly will show you some hardy perennials and shrubs that will thrive in your garden, and she'll also give some tips on planting and care to get them off to a great start. Holly grew up in the Willamette Valley and moved to Central Oregon in 1999. In 2001, she opened the Whistle Stop Farm and Flowers, and since their opening day 20 plus years ago, she's been growing hanging baskets, annuals, perennials, and helping Central Oregon gardeners find the right plants for their unique and often challenging Central Oregon gardens. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to turn this over to Holly. So thank you. And Holly, it's all yours.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining in on this presentation. So I have been doing this for, sorry, I'm trying to figure this out here, for over 20 years now. So I've definitely learned a lot along the way, and continue to learn. It's always changing all the time, and there's always new scenarios. So yeah, here we go. Well, as you know, to say the least, our climate can be challenging. So, you know, we face 50-degree temperature swings in a 24-hour period, herds of deer, and every other small animal you can possibly think of. And let's not forget the occasional smothering hailstorm. If we survive all of those things, then Mr. Pack Rat comes along and will cut your perennials off down to the ground and pile them up neatly, so he can come back and get them later. And yet we still persevere and keep trying to figure it out. So it's a lot to have to learn. With that being said, choosing plants that will work well for us can be both challenging and overwhelming at times. There are a few things to keep in mind when you are shopping for perennials and shrubs that will help you to know which are good choices and which ones will thrive in your gardens. The first thing is knowing your zone. Zones can vary here in Central Oregon. Generally in the high desert, where people live anyway, we can range from zone 4 to zone 6. Each climate zone is separated by 10 degrees. For example, zone 4 during the winter months will occasionally see winter lows that can range from -20 to -30. Zone 5 ranges from -10 to -20. And zone 6, you can expect to see ranges from 0 to -10 degrees. For my own yard, I like to stick with plants that are zone 5 or lower. We're pretty exposed. We get a lot of wind and it really whips through. And that can be pretty hard on plants and the different landscaping. I have had a few plants that are a little less hardy that are like a zone 6, but it really depends on the plant and the placement where it's planted. And those ones I know that if we had a really bad winter, I could lose them, but they hang in there. The next thing to consider is if you have deer or rabbits. If so, look for plants and shrubs that might be less desirable to these critters. This can be a really frustrating topic because plants that are labeled as deer resistant are not always deer proof. Some plants are more reliably resistant than others, but it can really vary depending on the time of year, what the food availability is, and if there are babies around, because babies like to try almost anything. There are some really good deer repellents and deer deterrents that are available and can be found in most garden centers, and they actually work quite well. If you have a larger deer or rabbit population, we do recommend spraying landscaping that you might put in to get started. Even if it's something that's not typically eaten, sometimes what we have found is that when you put new plants in, the deer like to come through and taste test your new additions. So repellents will definitely help to deter this problem. The next important rule that I like to share with people is that plants that do the best are the ones that are going to be drought tolerant. I'm not just saying this because of the current conditions that we have, but it's how it always is. Our landscape.
Holly, can I interrupt you just for a minute? This is Vicki. Are you, the slide that's up is just the temperature, the deer and the hail? Are you still on that slide?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Just want to make sure, because we want to make sure that we're covering everything. Thank you.
So during the summer months, our landscaping is watered throughout the growing season. So many people don't think about the rest of the year. Our winters and springs can be really dry. We can go from really warm and pleasant to bitter cold and windy with very little or no moisture at all. This is especially hard on plants, especially ones that are not drought tolerant. Now, when plants are labeled as being drought tolerant, this means they are drought tolerant once they are established. And I'm sure everybody's brought home plants that are drought tolerant and they've dried out really quickly. So that's a good example. These plants do need some time to develop a good root system in the soil that they're being planted in to be able to withstand periods of drought. You can help this process by amending your soil and adding good nutrients and monitoring your watering. Not too little and not too much. That can also be a big problem. Now, So I'd like to go into showing you some great perennial and shrub choices that I've had good success with. This is a small list of what's out there. There are a lot of options. These are ones that I felt are good garden hardy staples, plants that are hardy but maybe underappreciated, or really hardy plants that are lesser known. So there's a lot of really common great plants that are not on this list. So all of the ones I'm going to show you have more than one attribute, like being evergreen, drought tolerant, deer resistant, or attractive to pollinators. So we'll go to the plants. All right, first up, we have Aubrietta. It's also known as false rock cress. It's very similar to rock cress or Arabis, which is also a really great plant. So Aubrietta is hardy to zone 4. It does well in full sun. Aubrietta is a very early blooming perennial, usually starting in March or April and blooming through May. Aubrietta is an evergreen ground cover, only growing to about 5 inches tall and spreading up to 2 feet wide. It is also drought tolerant and deer resistant. One interesting fact I learned when putting this together is it's actually in the cabbage family, which is kind of unique. I did not know that. So yeah, kind of a quick little tidbit. Okay, Aubrietta does come in a variety of vibrant colors. So there's a lot of different varieties. Colors range from pinks, purples, and blues. Aubrietta is a great plant for cascading down walls or rock gardens. It also works well when planted as a border plant. It's very hardy and definitely worth having spots of in your garden. Next up is Basket of Gold. Basket of Gold is one of the first signs that spring has arrived with its bright yellow blooms. It's hardy down to zone 3. It grows quite well in full sun or part shade. Basket of Gold is a great plant with many different uses, including rock gardens. It stays fairly low, only growing to about 12 inches tall, and can spread 1 to 2 feet wide. Blooms usually last from April through May, and Basket of Gold is also a drought tolerant, deer resistant plant option. Okay, another awesome perennial is Creeping Phlox or Phlox subulata, hardy down to zone 3. Phlox grows well in full sun to part shade. It is an evergreen ground cover. It grows anywhere from 3 to 8 inches tall and typically spreads up to 24 inches wide. Blooming typically lasts from March or April through May. So you'll probably see it blooming around town right now. Creeping Phlox is drought tolerant and deer resistant also. Creeping Phlox is very low maintenance and it won't self-seed or spread anywhere. There are many different varieties that come in a lot of different colors. From whites, you can find stripes, pinks, purples, and blues. Phlox is a perennial that's worth having a lot of because it's just so hardy and so trouble-free. And the colors are just really pretty and they last a long time. The next hardy ground cover I find really useful is Cerastium or Snow in the Summer. Flowering usually starts in May and blooms through June. Snow in the Summer is drought tolerant and deer resistant. And it is also semi-evergreen. So it is technically an evergreen. I don't think it looks as nice as what we would call like a true evergreen, but it doesn't go completely dormant in the winter. When flowers start to fade, it's a good idea to go through and trim them back. This will really allow the silver foliage to show and look really healthy. It's actually quite pretty all season, even if it was just foliage. Next up is rock rose or helium. This is another perennial I've become quite fond of. There are a lot of different varieties of it. Helianthemum is lesser known, but it's a very hardy evergreen ground cover. Hardy down to zone 4, thrives in full sun, typically grows 6 to 8 inches tall and on average spreads to about 24 inches wide. Blooms last from mid-spring through the summer. This bushy ground cover is also drought tolerant and deer resistant. There is a lot of varieties, but I really like this one that's pictured here. It's called Fire Dragon. It has a lush silver gray foliage that gets covered in bright orange blooms that are really quite striking and noticeable. Although it doesn't really require any pruning or maintenance, after several years, I have noticed that this variety does get quite large and it can spread larger than 2 feet wide. So it can be pruned as needed and that won't hurt it at all. Next on the list is Artemisia. Some might know it as wormwood. Artemisia is hardy down to zone 3. It's a great full sun plant. Size is going to depend on variety. There are quite a few. This plant is not known for its blooms. Instead, it has beautiful silver foliage that lasts, all season. Artemisia is both drought tolerant and reliably deer resistant with its strong sagey-like smell. So there are a number of varieties of Artemisia. 2 of them that I like and have in my landscape are Silver Mound and Powys Castle. They are quite different from one another. Silver Mound grows up to 12 inches tall and 12 inches wide. It's super soft, almost feels like chenille. And it can be pruned or trimmed as needed. So say the dog jumps on it and smashes it, you can cut it all the way to the ground during the growing season and it will come back and be just as full and just as beautiful in no time. The next variety is Powys Castle. It's quite a bit different in that it gets quite large, so it really needs some space to grow. It gets up to 30 inches tall and wide. So if you got a big spot to fill and you want something that nothing will bother, this is a great plant. And it doesn't have that real soft chenille feel, but it's still a very, very nice plant. Another great plant known for its bright, colorful foliage is golden oregano. This plant is hardy down to zone 4, grows well in full sun or part shade, grows to about 6 to 10 inches tall, 1 to 2 feet wide. This is one of my favorite perennials. It's drought tolerant and deer resistant. Since the foliage is so bright and colorful, it always looks great. I have it all over my yard. And if you come here, you'll see I have it planted under all my catmints out in the parking lot. It really brightens up partly shaded areas. And it looks great when planted around almost any perennial. And it really can highlight rock garden spaces as well. So it's definitely kind of a great plant to have and maybe one that isn't known as much. Since it is an oregano, it also can be used for culinary purposes. Another very versatile perennial is dianthus. So there are over 300 varieties of dianthus, so size and colors can really vary. The hardy types of dianthus are reliable down to zone 4. And on the average, they usually grow 4 to 24 inches tall, depending on variety, of course. Generally, they bloom from spring through summer, some longer than others. Dianthus typically holds up really well in unpredictable spring weather. which is really helpful for us here. Many varieties are fragrant and are great butterfly attractors. Dianthus is also drought tolerant and deer resistant. So here's a few varieties that are kind of fun that I wanted to show you. On the right is one called Rockin' Red Dianthus. This variety grows 18 to 24 inches tall, and it's about that wide as well. It will bloom spring through summer, and this one makes an excellent cut flower. It's got some longer stems and really holds up well in a vase. And the color is just, it's an excellent color. The next variety is called Kahori Scarlet. This is a newer variety. It grows 6 to 8 inches tall. This one is very fragrant, and it has a vibrant hot pink color, which it's really hard to see, or to see the actual color or what it is, but it's blooming currently here in the nursery, and it's just very, very bright. Last, we have Everlast Violet Blue. This is one of the more unique colors. I don't usually see purples in Dianthus, and so I really like this one. It's a profuse bloomer and is very fragrant. This one gets about 12 to 14 inches tall. Because there are so many varieties of Dianthus, this is one you're going to want to be sure to read the label on, because there are a lot of varieties that are not considered perennials here, or that are just considered annuals. So they can still be worth having. They're beautiful, but if you're expecting them to be a perennial, you just want to make sure that you know what you're getting. All right, so here's one that most people know. Catmint is a favorite of many gardeners for many reasons. It's great for new gardeners and expert gardeners and everyone in between. It is one of the longest blooming perennials we can grow, starting usually in mid to late spring and going clear into fall. Catmint is hardy down to zone 4. Catmint grows really well in hot, full sun spots or partly shaded areas. And size is going to depend on variety, because there's a few of them out there. It is both or all drought tolerant, very deer resistant, and it is an excellent pollinator attractor. When ours is in bloom, it is just covered with honeybees. So it's a really, really great plant to have for that. I even suggest sometimes if people are having trouble with getting pollinators into their garden, if you have some catmint nearby, you will have pollinators in your garden. Okay, so as I was saying, the size can definitely depend on the variety. So I've got 3 different ones pictured here. These are ones that I like, that have worked well for us. First, we have Kitten Around. It's a very dwarf variety, and it stays typically 12 to 14 inches tall and wide. It's ideal for spots that don't have much space, or if you have taller perennials that you don't want to block, this is going to be a great option. The middle picture is Persian Blue. This variety grows 14 to 18 inches tall and wide. This variety has a little bit darker stem, and the flowers are a little bit darker blue than some of the other varieties. This one's really pretty. I like it just because it's a little bit neater than the Walker's Low variety. And up next is the Walker's Low, which is probably the best known of all the catmints. It's a little bit bigger, grows up to 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide. And it's beautiful all season. Any one of these varieties is a great addition. They're all super easy to grow, and they continue to bloom throughout the whole summer. All right, next up we have Black-Eyed Susans, or Rudbeckias. The perennial types are hardy down to zone 4. They grow very well in full sun or part shade. Depending on the variety, they typically grow 2 to 4 feet tall and 2 to 2.5 feet wide. Black-eyed Susans start blooming usually in midsummer and continue into mid-fall. This is another great drought-tolerant, deer-resistant plant that will also attract pollinators. As with most plants that we're talking about, there's a lot of different varieties that you can find them in. So the first one is Rudbeckia goldstrum. This is the true perennial type of Rudbeckia or black-eyed Susan. It grows 20 to 22 inches tall and wide. Has a nice bushy shape with loads of yellow flowers with the dark centers. And very easy to grow, and it's a really reliable perennial. Pictured on the right are some types of Rudbeckia hirtas. This type of black-eyed Susan, they're considered a biennial or a short-lived perennial. So they do self-seed quite prolifically, and they grow very fast. So once you've had them, if you've let them go to seed, you will always have them come back year after year. Rudbeckia hirta black-eyed Susans come in a variety of colors, including yellows, oranges, and rusty reds, and all kinds of variations in between. Some have dark centers, some have green centers, some are dwarf and some are taller. So there's really a great selection of those ones. This type of black-eyed Susan is definitely a must if you are growing a cutting flower garden. They have really nice long stems and they hold up for a long time in vases. So here is another great pollinator plant. Penstemon or beard tongue is a must for everyone's garden. There are more than 250 varieties of penstemons, and they really can vary in size and color. Hardy types of penstemons are hardy down to zone 3. They prefer full sun, but they will tolerate part shade. Sizes can vary from 6 to 30 inches tall and 8 to 24 inches wide. Blooming also will depend on the variety, but generally they bloom late spring through the summer. Penstemon is another drought-tolerant, deer-resistant plant, and with their tubular shaped flowers, hummingbirds really love these. All right, pictured are a few of the varieties that I like. Obviously, there's a lot, but I just had to narrow it down to just a few. So first we have Penstemon Red Rocks. This variety is really fast growing and it grows to about 18 inches tall and gets dark pink flowers. It's a very reliable, easy to grow perennial. Next is Penstemon Bridges. This one grows 25 to 30 inches tall. It's a native type of penstemon and has a somewhat shrubby appearance. Blooms are reddish orange and are prolific in the hot summer months. By the way, this flower looks really great planted with black-eyed Susans. I have a bunch of the Rudbeckia hirtas planted with this, and it's really pretty with the color combinations, and they bloom about the same time. Okay, next penstemon is Penstemon pinifolius. This is a more dwarf type of penstemon. Grows to about 10 to 12 inches tall and wide. This one can be found in reds or yellows like the one that's pictured here. And it is a semi-evergreen also. The bottom penstemon is called a Rocky Mountain Beard Tongue. This is actually my favorite penstemon. It gets to 18 to 30 inches tall and wide. And it is an absolute prolific purple blooming machine. Pollinators love it. It's a great plant. If you buy a small plant, like a 4-inch pot, It generally doesn't bloom the first year. It needs winter before it will bloom. But that second year, it's spectacular. Okay, next up is Speedwell or Veronica. This is another popular perennial in Central Oregon landscapes. And I'm sure the picture is not what you typically would think of when you think of Veronica. Veronica, typically when you see it, is has kind of spiked flowers like salvia. It comes in pinks and purples and whites. But today I would like to tell you about these varieties of Veronica, and they're actually ground cover types. And I just think they're underused and maybe just not known as well, but they are spectacular, and the color is really, really wonderful. So these varieties are all hardy down to zone 4. What I have pictured here is called Georgia Blue, but there's going to be some other varieties that we're going to see here in a minute. They grow well in full sun or part shade, and they're mostly spring bloomers, and some sporadically bloom throughout the season. One of the varieties I'm going to show you, actually, I've come out in December and found, a few flowers on it, in December. So it's kind of an interesting plant and how it does that. These are also drought tolerant, deer resistant, and either an evergreen or semi-evergreen. Okay, so the first one is the Georgia Blue variety. If I could talk. It grows 4 to 6 inches tall by 18 inches wide. It has this really pretty bronzy green foliage, especially in colder weather. That color gets a little bit darker on the foliage. And they, in the spring, are just covered in bright, like true blue colored flowers. These plants work really good in containers. They work in rock gardens or as a border plant. It's just a really useful plant. The next one is called Woolly Blue Veronica. This variety gets 2 to 3 inches tall and can spread to 20 inches wide, and sometimes even wider as time goes on. It also has the wonderful blue colored flowers. The foliage is a little bit more of a gray blue color than the Georgia Blue, and it also stays a little bit lower. This variety in particular is just super hardy and will thrive in most conditions. Snowmass or blue-eyed Veronica is the lowest growing of the group. Only grows 1 to 2 inches tall and spreads to 15 inches wide. Has a really pretty white flower with the blue eye, as you can see. Yeah, definitely an interesting little ground cover. Can also be used as like a steppable or planted like in a stepping stone or walkway type areas. And the last variety here that I have pictured is called Turkish Veronica. This one's a new variety for me this year. We're trying out. It has a little bit brighter blue of a flower than the other blue varieties. It grows 3 to 6 inches tall, 18 inches wide. So I'm really excited to see how it does. It's just as hardy, and since the other varieties have just been so easy to grow, I just thought it would be a really great one to put in and try. And so obviously works well in stepping stone or pathways, can grow in rock gardens or just about anywhere. All right, so we have bee balm or Minarda. By the name, it's probably not a surprise that this plant is loved by pollinators. Bee balm is hardy down to zone 3, and it grows very well in full sun spots. Depending on the variety, it can range in size from up to 4 feet tall and 2 to 4 feet wide. It's a summer bloomer, usually starting in July, so it really likes that summer heat. Bee balm is in the mint family. and it's super easy to divide. Bee balm is a drought-tolerant, deer-resistant plant, and of course, it attracts pollinators. There are many different varieties of Monarda, and they come in numerous colors and grow to different sizes. So red is probably the most common and what people think of when they think of bee balm, but it can be found in many shades of pinks, purples, and sometimes white. These are 3 examples of some of the different colors that are available. All 3 of these varieties grow to about 20 inches tall and about 16 to 18 inches wide. Fireball is a super pretty dark red, but the other varieties are just a really nice, vibrant color as well. All right, next up, we have Amsonia or Blue Star. This one isn't as well known, but it should be. This perennial is hardy down to zone 3. It sort of resembles asparagus when it's breaking dormancy and coming up in the spring. It has a really nice, full, rounded, shrubby form. Grows typically to about 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide. It starts blooming its sky blue flowers in the early spring and continues into early summer. Amsonia is very low maintenance and very trouble-free and doesn't seem to mind the unpredictable spring weather. In fact, we always do what we call sacrificial testers to put things out of the greenhouse to see how they're going to do in really cold weather. This is one that it's usually the first plant to start blooming. I can take it from a greenhouse and put it directly outside into weather like what we see now. And it does just fine, doesn't show any damage and continues to grow and not mind all the craziness. Amsonia is also drought tolerant and deer resistant, and definitely worth finding a spot for in your landscape. So now we're going to talk about a few perennials for your shady areas. Obviously, we have a lot of really hot, sunny locations. So shade plants can be a little bit harder to find and be a little bit harder to know which ones are going to do well and not get munched on by the local resident wildlife. Sweet woodruff is really high on my list of great perennials. It's a low grower. On average stays 6 to 8 inches tall and spreads 15 to 20 inches wide. It's a hardy plant down to zone 4 and is drought tolerant and deer resistant. Sweet woodruff has a dark green spear-shaped foliage that smells a bit like a light honey vanilla fragrance throughout the whole season. It also gets covered in tiny white flowers in the spring. Sweet woodruff is a great ground cover for tough shade areas that might be a little bit on the dry side. It also grows well in wet areas and it does good when planted under most trees. However, if you are planting under evergreens, it's always a good idea to kind of go through and clear out all the needles first because they can be a little problematic. So we sometimes use sweet woodruff in like our mixed shade containers with other annuals because it is such a great plant. The foliage and the flowers are really pretty, make a nice addition, and the fragrance isn't half bad itself. So definitely has a lot of uses. Lamium is another very versatile low grower for shady areas. It is hardy down to zone 3. Even though it prefers shady areas, it does tolerate probably about a half a day of sun. On average, it grows 6 to 12 inches tall and spreads 1 to 3 feet wide. Lamium will bloom throughout the spring, but the foliage color is really what the great part of lamium is. Um, it grows well in both wet and dry areas once established, and is very deer and critter resistant. Uh, Lamium is also a member of the mint family and is very dividable. Lamium comes in a variety of foliage and bloom colors. The three varieties I have pictured here are three of my favorites. Orium, which is the chartreuse leafed variety, has dark pink flowers. That chartreuse foliage really brightens up those shady areas since they can be a little bit darker. Checkers, it's a little bit taller than the other two, just by a little bit though. It has purple blooms and a small silver stripe on the foliage. And White Nancy has mostly a silver leaf with a green edge and clear white flowers. Any of these varieties can be used in mixed containers as well. We used to use them in our hanging baskets, but they are just a really useful plant to go in about anywhere you have. All right, hellebores are quickly growing in popularity. They are hardy down to zone 3 in most cases. They will grow in full shade or part shade, generally staying 1 to 2 feet tall and wide. Hellebores have a leathery green foliage that does stay evergreen in the winter, but it'll need to be trimmed away in the late winter or early spring to make way for the new foliage. They are drought tolerant and deer resistant. Hellebores are also known as Lenten roses or Christmas roses. In some cases, they will start blooming between Christmas and Lent. Typically here in Central Oregon, they start blooming between February and March once they're established. Young plants probably will start blooming a little bit later than that. Hellebore blooms, which are actually sepals and not blossoms, they last for several months. They can come in a variety of colors, ranging from pure white, shades of purple, and burgundy to almost black. Hellebores are poisonous if eaten, so be sure to keep pets who might have an appetite for your plants away from them. Bleeding hearts or dicentra, they certainly look like they're more on the delicate side, but that is definitely not the case. They actually can withstand very chilly winter temperatures. Bleeding hearts are hardy down to a zone 3. They grow quite well in full sun or shade and are drought tolerant and deer resistant. There are many types and can vary in size and bloom times. Old-fashioned types of dicentra or Dicentra spectabilis typically grow to 34 to 36 inches tall and wide, while dwarf varieties like Dicentra formosa grow 6 to 18 inches tall and wide. Okay, old-fashioned types like the three pictures at the start usually start blooming in a mid-spring and will bloom until the summer heat hits. At this time, usually those plants, the old-fashioned types, will go dormant and they can get cut back. There are many varieties of old-fashioned types of dianthus or dicentra, but these first three pictures are three of my favorites. So first we have the old-fashioned, which is what we typically think of color-wise for bleeding hearts. They bloom heavily, they're very pretty with their pink flowers. The next one is Valentine, which is super cool. It has a darker stem, darker colored foliage, and almost a red flower. They grow about to the same size as the old-fashioned variety, maybe just a little bit smaller, but the color is so unique and really vibrant. And Goldheart, which is obviously really bright and colorful. Again, great for those shaded areas because that chartreuse colored foliage just really stands out and brightens up those darker shady spots. They are just as hardy as one another, so any one of these varieties is a great addition. And on the right, I have pictured Dicentra formosa, or luxuriant. So unlike the old-fashioned varieties, this one doesn't go dormant in the summer heat. It actually will continue to bloom for the whole season. So that's a really nice addition since it has such a long bloom time. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some shrubs that are going to be hardy for your landscape and have some different attributes. So the first one we're going to look at are boxwoods. So boxwoods are, I feel, underused and sort of underappreciated. Growing up in the Willamette Valley, this is a shrub I didn't really like as a kid, just because it was so ordinary. It's what you see everywhere. But living in Central Oregon, it's super useful in that it's just a nice, different evergreen shrub. They can tolerate a wide range of conditions. They grow well in full sun or shade, and work well in just about any planting space. Size is going to depend on variety. So depending on what your space is, you're going to want to look for a variety that fits that space. For example, I believe the one pictured here is called Green Velvet. That variety will grow 3 to 4 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide. And this other variety here is called Highlander. That one is definitely more columnar. It can grow 6 to 7 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide. Boxwoods can be pruned into formal hedges or left natural with just the occasional light prune. They also can be pruned into different shapes for topiaries. And they actually do well. I have a few planted in whiskey barrels, like as centerpieces. I leave them out all winter, and they are in topiary form. So when spring comes around, I always have a centerpiece in my container, and we usually plant different colorful annuals underneath. So it makes a really nice, striking container in the summer, but I also have something that's there in the winter. So they definitely are very useful, and definitely I don't think used as much as they should be. All right, Potentia, another great Central Oregon staple shrub. Grows well in full sun or part shade. Potentias are very adaptable and very tough. They are hardy down to zone 2. And depending on the variety, they can grow anywhere from 2 to 4 feet tall and 3 to 5 feet wide. They do vary a little bit amongst the varieties. They have a very long bloom time. Blooming usually starts in late spring and will continue clear into the fall. Potentias are drought tolerant and deer resistant as well. So that definitely helps. All right, so the yellow flowering potentias are probably the most common, but they do come in other colors as well, like pink, white, and this tangerine color. This McKay's white is actually one that I really like. It's not usually one that people go to first because the yellow is definitely the brightest color, but this McKay's white is just a really profuse bloomer. I have it in my yard, and it requires almost no work at all, and it just blooms really heavily all summer long. All right, next up is Lydia Broom. Lydia Broom is a great low-growing spreading shrub. It is hardy down to zone 4. Grows quite well in full sun, hot spots. So typically they grow 1 to 2 feet tall and spread 2 to 4 feet wide. Lydia broom is a profuse bloomer in late spring into early summer. So it is related to Scotch broom, if any of you have come from the Willamette Valley or warmer climates or coastal climates. So they are cousins, and Scotch broom, as you know, is a noxious weed and can be quite invasive. Lydia broom is not invasive, and it is not a noxious weed. So I wouldn't, don't be calling the local offices for agriculture that, you know, your nurseries are selling Scotch broom, because it is quite different. This will not spread, it will not self-sow, and it will not become invasive in your yard. It's drought tolerant and deer resistant. It is very low maintenance. The only pruning that's needed is maybe if you have some branches, older branches that have died back, or if it starts to outgrow its space. Otherwise, it's relatively no maintenance at all. All right, so now we have elderberry or sambucus. This is quickly becoming very well known. They are typically hardy down to zone 3. They love full sun or part shade. Size is going to depend on variety. So the one pictured here is called black lace. This variety typically grows 6 to 8 feet tall and 6 to 8 feet wide. This variety is a really beautiful, large growing shrub. Has really dark purple foliage with large light pink flowers. And it's just covered in blooms from sometime either mid to late spring through early summer. Black lace also seems to be one of the most deer resistant varieties of elderberries. So these are all going to be drought tolerant. They're all going to attract pollinators, but there is one variety in particular that doesn't seem to be as deer resistant as others. Okay, so we have lemony lace is a newer variety. With its chartreuse foliage, it's really bright. I love this shrub for planting in partly shaded areas, again, to kind of brighten those spots up. This one's a little more compact than the other varieties, growing on average 3 to 6 feet tall and wide. And the black lace, which we already talked about, pictured here also. And then on the right is the common elderberry. This one on average can grow 10 to 12 feet tall and 4 to 6 feet wide. This one is the one that's not typically deer resistant. I'm not sure why, but I have them all actually in my landscaping, and the common one is the one the deer do seem to bother. So just a little note on that. So as far as fruit production, elderberries are considered to be self-fertile, but they are going to produce better if they have another variety of elderberry planted within 50 feet. So if you are wanting to actually produce fruit, that is the best way to do it. All right, up next is barberries. Barberries can really add some great color and texture to your landscape. They are a great shrub for full sun or hot spots. There are many different varieties, and they grow to different sizes and come in different colors. On average, you can kind of expect them to grow 2 to 5 feet tall, 4 to 6 feet wide. Barberries are drought tolerant and deer resistant. So here I have a few different varieties, and these are ones that that I like really well, that are really hardy and have different uses depending on the variety. So first we have Crimson Pygmy. Has a great purple color and grows to about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. So it's a really nice compact shrub, especially if you have it if you want to plant something by walkways or just have a small space that needs kind of a spot of color. Orange Rocket is more columnar in shape. They have orange foliage and are kind of a lime green underneath. They grow approximately up to 4 to 5 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide. And then next I have Orianana or Golden Barberry. This is one I really like. This one actually does well in partly shaded areas also. So again, works well to brighten up darker spots. It's going to stay fairly compact. It grows about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. And it's just a really nice addition with its chartreuse foliage. All right, so next is definitely one of my favorites, Daphne or Daphne Burkwoodii. These types are beautiful and fragrant as most varieties of Daphne, but the Burkwoodii types are both low maintenance and very reliable. I'm not including rock Daphne in this because it's just, for some people it does really good and some people it doesn't. It's just not the most reliable variety of Daphne. So I want to focus on the ones that you can really depend on and will be good and hardy and come back and look great year after year. So these varieties are really relatively low maintenance and trouble-free. On average, they grow 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, depending on the variety, and they keep a really nice, full, rounded shape. They bloom in the spring, so they start pretty early and they bloom for about a month. They are drought tolerant, they are reliably deer resistant, and they do attract pollinators. All right, pictured are 3 of the common varieties that we see. So first we have Carol Mackey. Basically the differences in these varieties is more the foliage color than anything. A little bit of size difference, but they're all pretty similar. So Carol Mackey has a green leaf with a white edged foliage. Somerset is a solid green foliage. And the Briggs Moonlight has a light yellow foliage with a green edge. Any one of these varieties is going to be really hardy and do really well, and they're all exceptionally fragrant. They all have white or light pink flowers, and they bloom abundantly. They make a great specimen shrub or planting, for along a walkway like a hedgerow. So I've got them in both types of scenarios. I also have some that we've planted in large containers that I just leave in those containers to overwinter, and they've done very, very well for many years. Nine barks or Physocarpus. It's a great shrub for year-round interest. They have arching branches that give it a nice mounded shape. Many of these types are hardy down to zone 2, so very, very cold hardy. Great for full sun or part shade. And mature size is going to depend on variety. So on average, 5 to 10 feet tall by 6 to 8 feet wide. They bloom in the spring, have a nice creamy white colored flower. And they have some really decorative seed pods that follow that are kind of a reddish color that are really attractive and showy. They are drought tolerant and they definitely have multiple seasons of interest. One thing I will note is that these are not going to be deer resistant. So if deer are a problem, you might want to stay away from this one or keep it sprayed or plant it maybe somewhere where deer aren't so much of a problem. So there's a lot of different varieties of nine barks. and they offer different colors of foliage, come in different sizes, of course. So there's really a wide range, anything from chartreuse colored foliage to just regular green foliage or dark purple, and sometimes even orange colored foliages also. So in the picture in the center, that's a picture of what the seed pods look like after the blooming is done. So obviously those last on the shrubs for a really long time. They're super pretty just because they really contrast with whatever foliage color they're growing against. It really doesn't matter. Any one of them, they're just all really, really pretty. All right, now I'd like to tell you about hydrangeas, specifically hydrangea paniculatas. These are not the same as the hydrangea macrophyllus, which are typically the ones you see in the Willamette Valley with the large pink or blue flowers. This variety of hydrangea is super, super hardy. They are cold hardy down to a zone 3, and in some cases down to -50. So that's a pretty amazing plant. They grow in full sun or part shade. Some varieties actually say they can grow in full shade spots, but what we found is if they're planted in full shade, they don't seem to bloom as well. So a little sun would definitely help them out. So these hydrangeas are not going to change color due to soil pH. They do have varieties that do change color, but it has nothing to do with the soil. So they are actually late season bloomers. They generally don't start leafing out until our spring frosts have just about passed. These varieties will bloom starting in the summer, and they go clear into fall. And actually the flowers will dry on the stems and keep their shape. So even after the plant is dormant, they will still have what looks like the dried blossoms on their stems. So paniculatas, one other thing is that they bloom on new growth. So if they do get frost damage, it won't ruin that season's flowers. So that's definitely one handy thing to know. So many types of these hydrangeas. There are many types of these hydrangeas. They do vary in size. The blooms are typically large, rounded, cone-shaped blossoms. And like I said earlier, they're not going to change color due to the soil pH. Some of them do change color as the season progresses into fall, like the one pictured here called Fire and Ice. It's going to start off kind of a creamy white color and then progress to pink and then to an almost burgundy reddish color. And there are several varieties that do the same thing where the color will change from a white color to a pink or from a lime green to a white. But it's just to do with temperatures and the day length. As for deer resistance, they are not deer resistant. They are left alone in my yard, but I definitely have heard a few cases of where they get eaten. So it's a really nice shrub to have. If you want to have it, but you have deer, I would recommend spraying it. Another thing with these, because they are so cold hardy, this is another shrub that can be grown in a container as well. And since they are such a great bloomer, they definitely have use in large patio pots. All right, so now I have some spireas. Spireas are another great staple for your landscape. They are hardy down to a zone 4. There are over 100 different types of spireas, so it's a pretty big family. I'm just gonna go through a couple of the varieties that I like. Size is also going to depend on the variety. They bloom from spring to summer. They are drought tolerant, deer resistant, and they are a great pollinator attractor. All right, so the two varieties that I really like, this is just personal preference. There are so many, we carry a lot of different varieties of spireas. And these are just ones that catch my eye a little bit more. And so that's why I'm going to show you these today. First one is Spirea japonica magic carpet. It's a really nice compact shrub that has a great round shape. It grows about 2 feet tall to 2 feet wide. Has a really great foliage color, and when the new growth is starting, it has that nice reddish colored tip on the leaves. It's really eye-catching throughout the whole season. It does bloom and has those really nice dark pink blooms that stay on the plant for a long time. When the blooms start to fade, I recommend trimming those back. This will encourage that new leaf growth, which will again give you that great color. But they're super easy and just stay nice and compact and really don't cause too much trouble. The next variety is Spirea niponica snow mound. This variety grows 4 to 7 feet tall and wide, blooms from mid to late spring. The arching branches are just loaded with white flowers. It's super eye-catching. And in the fall, it has a really pretty coppery yellow color to the foliage. So definitely has some really nice fall color to it. All right, and next are snowball viburnums. Viburnum is another family that's a huge group. There's tons and tons of varieties. This variety is hardy down to zone 2. Grows quite well in full sun or part shade. The size can vary quite a bit depending on the area. So when you look it up, it says 5 to 20 feet tall by 3 to 12 feet wide. I think typically you can expect these to grow about 8 to 9 feet tall and probably 6 to 7 feet wide. I have a whole row of them, in fact, that I've had for a long time. And that's about the mature size. After that, they grow fairly slowly. So this is an early summer bloomer. They just get covered in these big white snowball flowers. They are drought tolerant, deer resistant, and have multiple seasons of interest, which I'm going to show you guys. So these are the different seasons, what they look like throughout the season. After the blooming is done, they get these really pretty red berries, which the birds love. However, they are not tasty. There is a variety of viburnums that is called American cranberry, which can be edible. These ones are terrible, just so you know, but the birds seem to love them. And on the right is the fall foliage picture. So it's a little bit blurry, but really has a nice reddish color to that foliage. So basically all year, it's just a great shrub to have. But it does get quite full, so be sure to have a large area for it to be able to fill out in. So up next, I have junipers, and this one kind of, I know, makes probably some of you laugh a little bit because who likes junipers? That's all we see. But I do feel there's a couple of varieties that have really useful purposes and maybe are underutilized. But I will tell you, when I moved here, one of the first things we did when we bought our place is ripped out a bunch of old juniper shrubs. They mostly are not my favorite, but there's a couple of varieties I think are really, really useful and very pretty. So these are going to be hardy down to zone 3. And as you know, grow very well in full sun to part shade. And the two varieties I'm going to show you are very different size-wise. So They can get quite large, but not every variety is like that. They are evergreen, deer resistant, and drought tolerant in any variety. But the two that I wanted to show today are Juniper Blue Star and Juniper Moonglow. So Blue Star junipers, they're fairly compact in size. They grow 1 to 3 feet tall and 1.5 to 3 foot wide. The reason I love these is that they're a really dense, compact, rounded shrub. I love the color. It's a nice blue gray color, and they're extremely low maintenance. They really don't require much for pruning. Nothing seems to bother them. They don't get eaten. They are very disease and insect resistant. They're just a really easy, low maintenance shrub, and add a really nice evergreen touch to your beds and landscaping. Moonglow junipers are a little bit bigger in size, 10 to 15 feet tall, and I think it's up to 6 foot wide. These ones make a really great hedgerow, or they can be planted as a specimen type, just all by themselves. Again, they have a really nice kind of a blue-gray color, and they're just really easy and low maintenance. So I will tell you, if you're trying to do a hedgerow, you've probably seen around town where people plant arborvitaes. And there's a reason why arborvitaes aren't the best shrub for Central Oregon, because the deer love them and the insects love them. So I've definitely seen some ugly arborvitaes in looking around Central Oregon landscapes, but these ones are not going to be bothered by those same things. So they will keep that nice shape and won't get eaten down the centers by whatever critter that's hungry. So these varieties are definitely useful and have some have a definite spot in our landscaping. Okay, so that kind of concludes my list of plants that I want to tell you about today. But like I said, there's so many varieties of things that are really, really hardy. And so this was just a very small list of what's out there and what will do really well in your garden. So, but I'd like to talk about some little tips and stuff to help get things started, because as you know, that can be kind of tricky after you get them home. So, so the first thing is for soil. So your plants might survive in native soil, but they're probably not going to thrive. So this is why it is always a good idea to use a good compost mix to amend your soil before you start planting. And this goes for planting anything, whether you're planting perennials or shrubs or whatever it may be. Landscaping is expensive. It's an investment in your property. So you want to give your plants the best chance that they have or can have. So by adding compost and amending your soil, it helps in a lot of different ways. It's going to help with your drainage because you've probably seen when you go to water dirt, it's very repellent. It'll just run right off before it soaks in. So it's really hard to get it to soak in. And when it finally does soak in, it's so sandy that it drains through very quickly and the moisture doesn't stick around for very long. So by adding the compost, it's going to break it up and help the moisture to drain through. But the organic matter will also help retain some of that moisture there for you. So, so your plant can be quite a bit happier. Every few years, it's a good idea to go through and kind of freshen up soil that was amended when you were planting. And you can do that by adding it around. You can kind of scratch it in. You don't need to dig your plants and place it under, of course, but it's a very good idea to go through and kind of freshen it up every few years. So this is also going to add some great nutrients to your soil and just really help get those roots established and help your plant to thrive and do what it's supposed to do. Okay, so even though most of all the plants, if not all of them, I think all of the ones I talked about today are actually drought tolerant plants. Uh, Watering is super important. You're going to have to really go through and make sure that your watering source is actually getting the water to where it needs to be. So until your roots are established, you need to make sure you're checking in on it, because those roots can have a hard time reaching. Like if they're getting watered with a sprinkler system, sometimes the water goes over the plant and doesn't go right down to where it needs to be. So be sure to monitor and see what the water is looking like. You don't want it to be too much. As I mentioned earlier, that can actually be a bigger problem. So in early spring, when the days are cooler and the nights are cooler, you don't want to rot your plant out. So what I tell people is, when you go to water it well, and then let it dry to the touch in between. And then obviously when the season changes and our daytime and nighttime temperatures rise, it's hard to even get enough water on things, especially new plantings. So this time of the year, you have to go through and really make sure that the water is definitely getting on the plant and it's staying continually wet, especially if you're planting like in the heat of the season. Water needs are going to be different depending on the size of plant you're planting. For instance, if you're planting a young plant that's maybe in a 1-gallon container and doesn't have as big of a root system, it's not going to be able to handle as much water. So that one you're definitely going to want to make sure and go a little bit lighter on, and water as needed, but don't drown it out. As opposed to maybe a shrub that's in a 5-gallon container and it's fairly root bound. That one's going to need a lot more water. So know the differences between them, and just monitor how your watering is working. Next thing to be aware of and be on top of is be sure to read your labels and your tags. Almost every plant type, as I've talked about, have a lot of different varieties. All these different varieties come in different sizes and shapes. So definitely it's going to be important to know what you're getting and if it's going to work in the spot you have. Not all of these varieties are hardy for our climate. I'm going to use lavender, for example. So there are a lot of lavenders that are sold, especially at the big box stores, that are not hardy here. They're beautiful, they bloom like annuals, and they're the ones that people grab first off the shelves because they're always super pretty and they're always in bloom. Those varieties are not always hardy here. So be sure to read the label. It should tell on the back how cold it can grow to. And also watch for important planting and growing info, such as pruning and other details. Clematis is a good example. Clematis has several different pruning types. So depending on the type you get, they're going to have different pruning requirements. So what you don't want to do is have a variety that, let's say, blooms on old growth, but you're pruning it every spring. So when that happens, you're never going to see flowers. So always pay attention to that to know what pruning needs are and the planting needs are. All right, so that concludes my talk on high desert hardy perennials and shrubs. Thank you guys all for listening in, and hopefully that was helpful. And if you have questions for us later, this is how to contact us. We aren't open yet, but coming up soon, April 22nd is opening day, and then we'll be open from the rest of the season after that. So not all the plants we talked about here are going to be available right on opening day. So just be aware of that. If there's something you're looking for, it's usually throughout the season, we have a lot of these things that we've talked about.
Well, thank you, Holly. That was amazing. And I hope that you can stay on a little longer. We've got 19 questions for you.
Oh,
and they're
nice.
all just great. So I'm going to have you stop sharing your screen,
All right.
get that off. So I was
Right.
taking notes, so I think other people probably were as well. And for those of us, and you've still got a lot of people still on waiting to hear answers. So I'm just going to take them from the top
Okay.
and we'll just work through them. So Terry asked, Obrietta looks similar to Lithidora. Is Lithidora in the same family?
No, it is not. Lithidora is a super blue, really pretty ground cover. It is not that hardy here. I have seen it grow and come back. It's not exceptionally drought tolerant. The foliage is quite a bit different too, but it has a really great blue color, but it's not one that I consider as reliable. But yeah, not related to Aubrietta.
Okay. Next question's from Jamie. Which of the plants that you highlighted do well in very sandy soil?
Okay, so almost all of these varieties, and that was one of the reasons why all of the varieties of plants and shrubs that I chose today, because at the heart of it, that's what we have is really, really sandy soil. So any one of these is going to be one that can grow in sandy soil. If your soil is super sandy, that's where you're going to want to add some amendment. So like I said, these plants will survive, but if you are able to amend your soil, they'll really thrive. But all of them are meant for like well-drained, sandy types of soil, and they will all survive under those growing conditions.
Well, that's what we've got in Central Oregon.
That's what we have. So
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Laura asks, does Artemisia flower? And if yes, the colors. And I wasn't aware that there was any kind of flashy flower in Artemisia. So I'm
So
interested in the
it
answer there.
does, Artemisia does have a flower. The flower is very insignificant and I think it depends on the variety. Sometimes they're like a white or a very light yellow, but they're very small and very insignificant. Artemisia is typically grown for the foliage color and texture. Um, so flowering isn't really what they're known for.
Okay, this is awesomely great. We still got quite a few questions. Lisa asks, can you recommend a vine that does well in the shade?
Okay, so the shade questions are always a little bit tougher. There is a variety of honeysuckle that is labeled as being full shade. It's called late Dutch. I haven't actually tried it out to see how well it does. Um, I have some Virginia creepers that grow on the north side of some buildings, so they get some morning sun, but then the sun is blocked by trees from about 11 o'clock on, and they do quite well. They don't change color as well as if they're in the full sun, but it still is really, really hardy. There's some types of clematis that do okay in shade. Clematis always likes its root base in the shade, but the flowers can handle the sun. And I have a silver lace vine, and it says full sun, but so when anybody comes to shop the nursery, you can see it actually gets just filtered light all day. It's actually rarely in the evening, it gets a little bit of full sun, but otherwise it's in the shade. And that does really, really well also. Shade vines are a little bit tougher to find if it's dense shade, but if it gets filtered light, there's a lot of different options that you can try. Our sun, what I tell people is really concentrated. So most full sun plants, vines, shrubs actually do quite well in part shaded areas because the sun we get is so intense. It doesn't need to be in a full day sun anyway.
Okay, great info. Okay, Cheryl asks if you can recommend any perennials that would do well in containers.
There are a lot of hardy perennials that do well in containers. So a good rule of thumb, if you're wanting to plant in containers and have them overwinter, is plant something that's a zone hardier than you actually are. So if you are like I am here, a zone 5. If you plant something hardier than that, it's going to be reliable. So I have a lot of big containers on my deck, both front and back, and out by our barn and in the nursery area. So I like to use like big grasses like Carl Foresters, or even blue oak grass, boxwoods, just for some evergreen color in the winter. Lamium is a great container plant. The hydrangeas I mentioned earlier, the paniculatas, because they're so hardy, they just do really, really well. So yeah, about any perennial that I would say is, I would definitely go with something as zone 4 or colder type perennial. Those are going to overwinter quite well. So perennials like lavender, I would probably stay away from if you reliably want them to come back. Lavender isn't quite as cold hardy as some of the other perennial options.
Oh, you just answered one of the questions that was further down. I'm just going to go ahead and read that since you just brought that up. Great segue. Tips for English lavender in pots.
Yeah.
This person trimmed them back in the fall to a nice small mound, but they never seem to survive the winter.
Right. So English lavender is the hardiest type of lavender we can grow. But here's the thing. English lavender is a zone 5 plant. So yes, it can be hardy down to -20. The one thing I've noticed is that they are not crazy about wild temperature swings. So when we've had years where we've gone from 1 week it's 65 and comfortable in the fall to -15, well, you'd think they should be able to withstand that, but it's too hard on them. They don't like it. And so the thing with containers we got to realize is during the winter months, they're freezing and thawing on a daily basis. And they're drying out, and well, sometimes they're really wet, but typically they're really dry all winter. But the freezing and the thawing is really, really hard on plants, especially for plants like lavender. It's just, it's a harder one to grow in a container. If you want something that resembles that, I would go with catmint. It's going to be hardier and it's way more adaptable to the temperature swings than lavender is.
That's another great segue because we have a question about
Like
catmint.
I already know.
Well, and this person, Peter, wants to know how you tell the difference between catmint and catnip. And I want to assure our audience, we really didn't practice this. So we're not feeding each other these segues. It's just, this is how it's coming. So what's the difference between catmint, nipata, and catnip?
Okay, so they are all in the same family, but they're very, very different. So catmint is sort of like a pseudo catnip. So yes, cats can be drawn to it. And yes, I have seen my cats kind of rolling around it and acting kind of goofy, but it is not the same plant. Catnip is actually what I consider quite invasive. It self-seeds and goes everywhere. It grows taller and has kind of a white, sort of insignificant flower, whereas catmint, nepeta, is just a prolific purple bloomer and is just really, really pretty all season. It can spread, it can self-seed, but I wouldn't say that it's like invasive like catnip. I have in my flower beds that I've been trying to get rid of for years, and now I've even seen it spread to other areas of our property, like along ditch banks. It's a lemon catnip, and it gets super large, and it's really, really invasive, and those seeds go everywhere, and literally everyone will grow. So,
Wow.
so that's the main difference. Yeah, very, very different in how they look.
So one more Nepeta question, and Kim wants to know if there are some varieties that have white flowers.
There is other varieties of catmint that do have white flowers. There are some that have pink flowers too. They're not, so I've tried growing them in the past. I don't feel as though they are anywhere near as pretty or as prolific of bloomers as the purple catmint varieties. And I also don't think they're quite as hardy. Mine have, yeah, disappeared very quickly. So the purple ones are definitely the way to go.
So Holly, we've got about 16 more questions. Are you good to, because I think they'll be easy questions to answer.
Yes.
Okay, moving on then. Laura would like to, she says lamium is part of the mint family, as you know, but does culinary mint, for instance, spearmint or peppermint also grow here, and maybe in a pot would be better?
Right. So culinary mint can be quite invasive. I still like it in my flower beds. And actually, it kind of depends on the variety because, so I like to grow pineapple mint, spearmint. We have all kinds of mint growing here. Pineapple mint, for example, doesn't spread quite like spearmint does. If you're concerned about mint being invasive, yeah, definitely growing it in a container is a great idea. It's really, really cold hardy. So it will reliably overwinter in containers. I will tell you though, if you are trying to keep it out of your flower beds and you have it in a container sitting in your flower beds, it can root through the bottom of your container and go in. I don't find that it's really that hard to get rid of or weed out or weed back, but some people don't like it. But I think it's a great plant, especially for dry areas or areas that are a little harder to get to grow things, or say you have herds of deer. Planting things like mint or things that are really deer resistant and really smelly, like have a lot of fragrance to the leaf, I think is a great deterrent to keep them out of other plants that they may like to eat. So it
Good,
definitely is useful.
good point. I've actually put a bucket with no holes in the bottom and sunk it and then put the mint in it. But okay, now I think you answered part of this question on the hellebores. Shirley asked if any of these plants were toxic to pets and dogs, and you said the
Yes.
hellebores were. Were any of the others?
Yeah, there are other varieties of plants that I talked about that are toxic. That was just the one that I didn't realize. And when I was kind of looking up pictures and getting some information, it just came up over and over again that that was poisonous to your pets. I believe that like Dicentra is also a poisonous or toxic plant. Um, if you are concerned, I probably would go through and look it up online and see if it's toxic. I
Right.
actually think this is interesting because Tina, one of our employees here, just this morning did a blog post on gardening with pets. And I believe you can get to that through our website. So she was going through and finding different plants that be careful to plant with if you have
Oh,
pets. And you eat them.
great information. Okay, Cindy asks, do bleeding hearts require more water than some of the other options?
Not really, no. They look like they should, but they are super hardy. So, like in winter months, so I have some big bleeding hearts under the eave of my house on the north side, and so all the moisture is blocked. It doesn't get any of the runoff because it's literally under the eaves, and they are have done really, really well. I don't think they require any more moisture, but they do, you know, during the growing season, they do need some water to be able to grow. Um, but yeah, no, they're another plant that holds up well in dry conditions.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I have those in my garden and they're gorgeous.
yeah.
Love them. So Dana asks if all varieties of barberry plants have stickers.
Yes, they do. They all have stickers. And some people say that's one reason the deer leave them alone. However, I have plenty of thorny plants that the deer don't mind eating. So I don't think it's necessarily the thorns why they leave them alone. I think there's more to the taste than the thorns, but for that. But yeah, they do all have stickers, unfortunately.
Oh, but that's okay. Georgina asks, can you advise on some fast growing deer resistant climbers, full sun to partial shade? You may have answered part of that question on the vines, but
I'm assuming, yeah, we're talking about vines, climbers. So yeah, so hops are a good vine that the deer do leave alone that grows very, very fast and
Good.
quite dense. The one thing with hops to just keep an eye out for is they can get aphids. So just be on the lookout at the first sign. I would go through and treat them. If you can prevent the problem, obviously it's a lot easier than having to treat the problem or treat a big problem. But it's a beautiful growing vine. They're super easy and very low maintenance, and they don't require a lot of water either. I haven't had any deer bother my Virginia creepers, so and they've been planted here for years and years and years. You see them on a lot of the old homesteads, and they do quite well. Um, so those are a good one, and I believe clematises are also listed as deer resistant. So um, those are some good choices if you're trying to plant for deer resistant vines.
And the clematis are beautiful. So,
Yeah.
okay, we're moving along because I know time is ticking here, and I want to make sure we can get to our questions. So Scott asks if you have any tips on pruning or maintaining hydrangeas in Central Oregon.
Oh, so the cool thing, and I'm just going to talk about the ones that we talked about today, the paniculatas, because I'm not as familiar with some of the other varieties. Some of the other varieties that aren't as hardy, people do get to grow here, but usually they get smaller and smaller and smaller each year because they don't thrive. But the paniculatas, for example, they bloom on new wood, like we talked about. So basically, you can prune them however you need. You don't have to prune them. You can let them go and get really large, or you can prune them down if they outgrow their space. This will not affect their flowering abilities. So if you're going to prune, now is a good time because they haven't leafed out yet. So it's not going to slow anything down. Like I said, they are one of the later plants to leaf out. And I always have people that are concerned that maybe they didn't make it through the winter. That is almost never the case. They just don't start leafing out until it's done freezing. But yeah, now is a great time for pruning those.
And there's a follow-up question on hydrangeas, and that's when to fertilize them.
I would wait until spring has sprung, until it's a little bit warmer. What you don't want to do is encourage a bunch of leafy growth when we have those warm days, especially on plants like hydrangeas, because since they are a late season grower, they will get damaged by spring frosts. It doesn't matter how hardy a plant is. It's just that's how they grow. And so they don't like to freeze. They want to wait until the freezing's done. So it's really hard on them if they start growing before freezing's done. So I would just wait until probably around maybe the first part of June, and then you can throw them a little plant food.
Oh, good. So we have a couple of questions on when the best time is to plant perennials and many of these plants that you showed us today.
Oh, well, that's a good question. I'm really glad somebody asked because there's a few things I did want to talk about for that. So what I always tell people, and I'm probably the worst business person, but I tell people to wait until it's warm enough that you don't have to worry about your plants getting damaged. Don't be in any big hurry because these temperatures and these cold temperatures with this wind is especially hard on plants. If we just had cold, that's one thing, but that wind is really tough. So I would wait until it warms up a little bit. There are some things that are out and have been out and that can withstand these crazy temperatures and that can be planted and you don't have to worry about. But there's a lot of other things that it's better to wait. So plants that would be good right now are creeping phlox, basket of gold. We moved out a bunch of irises. We do have quite a few things that we put outside to really harden off and that would do good. But a lot of the varieties, especially the plants that are later bloomers and later growers, those are going to be hard to find in nurseries right now in the spring because they, like I said with the hydrangeas, they just don't start until it's done freezing. So not everything that I talked about today, you're going to be able to go out and find right away. Some of those things aren't going to be available till later in May or first part of June. So I would just wait a little bit until we get past some of these cold nights.
Okay. I'm just doing a time check. You're still good to keep answering some
Yeah,
questions?
I'm still good.
Perfect. Well, I'm doing my hosting. So, okay. So we've got a question from Karen. And it has to do with the elderberries that you'd mentioned planting a variety of elderberries together to promote flowering. And her question is, rather than multiple plants of the same variety together, or did you mean really different varieties, or how to do that?
Right. So what I was saying is that is a different variety, and they don't need to be planted right together, but within 50 feet of each other. And it doesn't promote flowering; it will promote cross pollination to produce fruit. So you want to have a different variety if you want to really see some good fruit production.
Perfect. So Tim asks if you have any recommendations for a few perennials or shrubs that are blooming now when his apple, plum, and peach trees are blooming to attract the pollinators.
Oh, to attract pollinators. Well, that is tough because there aren't a lot of pollinators right now. I mean, we have seen some. There are some out there. It's just, it's kind of cold still. Um, so as far as things that are blooming right now, if you can find forsythias, those are blooming currently. Creeping phlox is blooming. Obviously, bulbs and things like that are blooming. I've got rock cress and aubrietta that's blooming right now. Um, and it's a little bit early for catmint. I have seen some buds on some of them, but that's going to be a little bit of time. But that's about what I can think of off the top of my head. I know my Daphnes are getting close too. They have buds on them, but yeah, it's a little bit tough for fruit trees, whether or not we're gonna, get pollinators in there for those guys.
Well, and with our weather recently, it's been kind of crazy.
Right.
So Teresa would like to know if you have any suggestions to underplant a juniper tree.
Junipers can be tough. From what I know about junipers is that the juniper duff actually like puts off a sort of toxin that will kind of inhibit growing. So that's where you would want to make sure and really clear out all the debris underneath your juniper tree. And you might have to add some compost to really try to get things to grow. So I have been successful with sweet woodruff and lamium under my evergreens. I haven't tried planting them under junipers. In our nursery area, I do have a flower bed that kind of goes around a juniper tree, but that one is built up and has amendments. And it has all kinds of different flowers in it that grow quite well. If it's a pretty brightly shaded spot, irises will grow just about anywhere. So you could probably put some irises in and mix in some of those other ground covers. And that would give you some kind of variations to grow there. But lamium is really hardy. If it does get some sun, you could probably plant that and it would probably do quite well.
Okay. Terry asks, or she says she sees soil thermometers for sale, but she wants to know if there is a device that you're aware of that can determine moisture levels below the surface. And I know this came up last week in our basics class about how do you know that the water is getting down to the root level where it needs to be.
Well, I'm sure there are devices and things out there, but I am a very common sense kind of girl. So what I would do, and what I do is I go out and check it. You know, pull just some of the, like if you have bark or something around your plant, pull it away and actually look at the dirt, feel it. Take a garden trowel and just scoop a scoop and see how moist is it? How low is your moisture getting? Um, for our nursery plants, what I tell people and new employees is if you are wanting to know how well you watered something, take the plant, flip it upside down, and pull the pot off and actually look at it. Of course, we can't do that with things that are in the ground.
Right.
but I really like to get my hands on it and see it for myself. So I don't really know of a specific device that would check for watering, but I do know they're out there. But just looking at the soil, going by touch, will tell you a lot.
Well, the trowel trick is a good one to keep in mind because that really does work well.
Right.
Okay, we're coming down. We're actually down to like just a few more. Thank you. Laura asks about roses. She's coming from Portland and she wants to grow roses.
Oh, well, roses so I was really young when we moved here, and that is was my favorite of all time, favorite plants. And then I was met by the voles and the deer and everything else, and that became kind of challenging. So be aware, all of our wildlife seems to really like roses. There are varieties that do better than others. Um, I have a really good friend who is an expert rose gardener here in Bend and has probably over 50 different varieties, and he does amazingly well with them. But if you're not too sure, start off with the hardier ones. Tea roses are a little tough. Uh, so those ones, they can be hard to grow, but shrub type roses, some floribundas, rugosa roses do particularly well. Um, but you have to protect them from all the animals that love them also.
Okay. All right. Let's see what we've got left here. 5 questions. We're down to 5. What Sarah wants to know, what will not mind 12 plus hours of full sun against an afternoon sun wall? Last sun.
Well, most of what I talked about actually would do quite well, except for, of course, the shade plants. So I've got my very large black lace elderberry is actually against my house on the southwest side. So it's full hot sun all day, and it is spectacular. It's up to the eaves, and it's very full and blooms quite profusely. And all the perennials that I talked about today do really, really well in those same spots. The key is making sure that they're not, even though these plants can all withstand drought, that those spots are getting enough water. They all should be able to withstand that hot sun. Just make sure when they're watered well, watered deeply, and they will do just fine.
Perfect. Okay, so follow up on this. Thoughts on Russian sage?
Russian sage is a great plant. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of really wonderful plants that were not on my list today. And so Russian sage just wasn't one of them. I find that there's a lot of different varieties. So some are a little more compact, and there's the larger varieties. The larger varieties can get a little bit rangy over the years, so they need a little bit of cleanup. It can be a little tough. There can be a little bit of winter die out, but it's not too bad. It's generally a pretty hardy, and it's a beautiful late season plant. Pollinators love it, and the deer don't ever bother it. I think it's definitely worth having in your yard, and maybe having more than one. It's very, very pretty, very attractive plant. And for the most part, it is easy to grow.
Okay, so coming down the home stretch here, Julie asks if you have any recommendations for the best deer repellent. They live in Eagle Crest and the deer eat everything.
Right. That is the key. So we have a couple good sprays that we sell here. And there's a lot of really good products out there. And there's new products that I hear about all the time that I don't know as much about. But the ones that I do have are tried and true. So we sell 2 different sprays. One's called Liquid Fence, and the other one is called Deer Stopper. Both work really, really well, and the manufacturer actually does guarantee them. After using them for a long period of time, like months and months, it's recommended to switch them up. and don't stick with the same one, because apparently after months of use, deer can acquire a taste for them or something. But as long as you're changing it up, they continue to work quite well. The liquid fence spray is quite smelly. So what we tell people, the best way to use it is in the evening before you go in at night, go through and spray what you need to spray. Do not stand downwind. That one we've all learned the hard way. And then just go in and don't leave your windows open for a little while. It only stinks for about 20 minutes until it dries, and then it doesn't smell anymore, but it works very well. The deer stopper, however, is a newer formulation, and it doesn't stink. It has the same active ingredients. Both sprays, I will say, are safe for pets. They're non-toxic and they're all made from natural things. But the deer stopper uses things like clove oil, rosemary oil, or mint oil. So that's actually what you smell. You don't smell the putrescent egg solids that make it very, very resistant. And so, but yeah, both of those work really good. And there's a couple different formulations of deer stopper, so that if you don't want to use a stinky one, you can switch up between the good smelling ones. Yeah, there's any number of sprays that do work quite well.
Oh, we do get that question a lot. So, okay, Sarah wants to know if you have any suggestions on how to get rid of bindweed. So I'm not sure that's a question for you, but do you have
yeah, you know, I guess it's, for me, it's another one that's pretty, it's kind of just a general, like, it's the same thing with like cheatgrass or any other of those same type of weeds that, we just don't want. And really, it's just diligence. It's just getting out there and getting it out before it goes to seed. Once it's gone to seed, you're too late, because you're just gonna have more when it comes back. So being on top of it as early as you start seeing those things come up is really gonna help. It'll definitely help it from spreading. Eventually you'll get there, but yeah, it can be kind of tough.
Okay, this is the last question that we have, and it's from Bob, and he is interested in knowing if you have I can say this, if you have a recommendation for a plant reference manual for Central Oregon.
Oh, well, so there are a bunch of really great links on the Master Gardener site, right?
Yes, there are, and we can send that out. There is actually a plant resource guide, and there's the Water-Wise Gardening Guide, and we will put all of those in the email for people. They're great resources, as well as the general gardening publications link that has all kinds of information for people on how to grow roses, for the rose people, varieties that grow well here, and things like that. But the Water-Wise Gardening Guide is terrific.
I was going to say, so we use that Water-Wise Gardening book quite a bit. There's a lot of great plants in there. So yeah, that's a really, really helpful guide for plants that work well.
Well, we will, for our guests who are still with us, and there are quite a few of them, we will make sure to get that link into the email for you. And we've got a couple of other links about gardening and drought conditions that we'll also add to that. Okay, so I think that was it. I'm going to share my screen here real quick and just say to all of our guests, and to Holly especially, thank you. Thank you. This was an amazing couple of hours of information. And as I indicated earlier, the recording of the webinar will be available. And please don't forget to fill out our survey. We do rely on information that you give to us and the feedback that you get to us to help us improve our offerings to our gardening public. And also go and visit our silent auction site that's going on still and will be until the 23rd of April. And again, I want to say thank you, Holly. This was amazing. I loved the pictures and all of the information about deer-proof, drought-tolerant, sun, shade. I mean, it was incredibly helpful. So,
well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just checking here. Oh, many people are saying thank you. Super appreciate the session. Fantastic. Thank you. Great presentation. So you were a hit. So, and just folks, don't forget to do the survey. That would be the biggest thing. And thank you. And I think that we're going to call it a day.
All right. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you around the nursery.
Thank you, Holly. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.